Imagine being just 12 years old, a child in the middle of a terrible war that was destroying everything around you. Now, imagine being chosen, not for safety, but to be praised and given a medal by one of the worst people in history, Adolf Hitler. This is not a made-up story. This is what happened to a boy named Alfred Czech. His amazing and scary story shows a dark part of history about children caught in the war. What did Alfred do to get the Iron Cross Award during World War II? And what really happened to him after that day? Join us as we carefully look at the life of the boy whom Hitler gave the Iron Cross, a story that shows the deep sadness of child soldiers. On March 20th, 1945, with the sound of Soviet cannons shaking Berlin, Adolf Hitler came out of his safe bunker. He was clearly sick and worn down by the fact he was losing the war. This was one of his last times seen in public, a desperate show to pretend he was still strong. He wasn't there to talk to his soldiers or plan with his leaders. No, his reason was more symbolic and scary. He was there to put medals on 20 boys, most of them just kids, who were still holding on to the false idea that they could still win. Among them was 12-year-old Alfred Czech, the smallest boy in the line, whose helmet looked too big and wobbled on his head. He was from a faraway area called Silesia. In that broken, bombed-out garden, a scene that must have felt very strange, Hitler leaned down. Propaganda photos, shared everywhere at the time and later studied by historians, show the Führer pinching the boy's cheek. It looked almost like a grandfather, but it was very creepy. People who were there remembered him saying a usual empty phrase, "Weiter so, keep it up." And with that, he gave the child the Iron Cross Second Class, a symbol of bravery in a war that was no longer honorable. A camera, which was always there for these planned moments, took a picture of Alfred's quick smile. Propaganda films, quickly made and shown, did the rest, showing a young hero in a country that was about to fall apart. But what happened after that picture was taken? How does a young boy, made into a hero, handle the hard change to a prisoner, then a refugee, and finally, a legend he didn't want to be? This is the rest of Alfred Czech's story, the part the news films, in their carefully made stories, chose not to tell. It's a story that makes us look past the fake pictures and see the real human price of war. Alfred was born in 1932, a year Germany was dealing with a bad economy and the scary rise of the Nazi Party. His home was Goldenau, a simple farming village in Silesia, a place that had mostly stayed out of the country's big problems. Life there was simple, based on the seasons of the land. His father worked the fields to grow food, while his mother, a very strong woman, managed to feed her 6 children during the very poor times of the Depression. When the war started in September 1939, the village first heard it as far-off sounds. They listened to radios with bad reception, hearing news of wins in places far from their quiet lives. They watched with wonder and fear as trains full of soldiers and gear rumbled eastward, taking the war further away. And they hoped that the Eastern Front, that scary and brutal part of the war, would stay far away. It did not. Like a tide that couldn't be stopped, the war came closer. By 1944, the scary sound of Red Army guns could be heard on clear nights, a clear and scary sign of the trouble to come. Village life started to fall apart quickly. Teachers, who used to be figures of stability, disappeared. They were forced into quickly formed and poorly armed local defense groups. School, once a daily thing, became much shorter, just 2 mornings a week, as everyone focused on survival. Then came the children. Boys Alfred's age, who were not very strong, were given shovels. Their new job was digging simple but important ditches for defense, instead of learning in school. The Hitler Youth, once known for Saturday parades and songs, turned into something much darker, required combat training. They were taught to throw grenades, using wooden ones, in a dark practice for the real fighting ahead. They learned to shoot with carbines, guns that were so heavy that small boys like Alfred struggled just to hold them steady. And there were long, boring talks about how they had to hold the final victory line, a line that was already breaking everywhere. Alfred, a small boy in a big war, found himself carrying a heavy box of anti-tank weapons and tried not to look as scared as he was. He was 11 years old, and his childhood innocence was being taken away and replaced by the hard truths of total war. The event that would change Alfred Czech's life forever happened on March 19, 1945, just one day before his famous meeting with Hitler. Alfred and 20 other boys from the Jungvolk, the younger part of the Hitler Youth for kids aged 10 to 14, got a very desperate and dangerous order. They were told to bring ammunition to a group of German soldiers who were trapped in a forest near their village. The situation was very bad. The main road was being hit by Soviet cannons, making it a deadly place. Trucks were burning, and the sounds of hurt men came from the ditches. The officers, in a scary sign of how desperate they were, thought these children could sneak through the bushes where adult soldiers could not. It was a risk with children's lives, a desperate move in a war they were losing. Alfred, even though he was scared, went first. He crawled on the hard, frozen mud, pulling boxes of ammunition with a rope, a very hard job for a boy his size. He made 3 dangerous trips back and forth. Each time, he not only brought supplies, but also pulled out a wounded German soldier, saving them from being killed or captured. On his last scary trip, while moving through the woods, Alfred saw something strange: a soldier's coat hidden in the bushes. His heart must have pounded when he realized it was a Red Army scout, secretly looking at German positions. Without waiting, and with a courage that was surprising for his young age, Alfred pointed his heavy rifle at the scout. He yelled, "Hände hoch! Hands up!" and held the man until German soldiers came to take him prisoner. Alfred Czech was 12 years and 3 months old. His friends, maybe amazed by what he did, gave him a nickname, Der kleine Hauptmann, the little captain. The commander of the regiment saw how brave Alfred was and the great use for propaganda, so he immediately radioed Berlin to recommend a medal. The answer, which showed how much the government wanted hero stories as it was failing, came in hours. The Führer himself would meet the boy the next day. Alfred, a child who had just faced death, spent that night in a cold cellar with newspaper in his socks to stay warm, trying to imagine what a medal from Hitler would feel like. He was about to become a symbol, a small piece in a bigger, darker game. The morning came with a staff car, a surprise comfort in the middle of the war, and a uniform. It was not his own, but a borrowed one that was too big, making him look even smaller. Then came a train ride through a terrible scene of burning stations and broken buildings, a clear reminder of the war's damage. Years later, Alfred would remember little of that strange trip, only the strong, sharp smell of smoke and an aide repeating the same instruction over and over. Look fearless. It was all about how things looked, even then. They arrived at the Reich Chancellery Garden in Berlin, a place carefully set up for the cameras that were already filming. 20 boys stood in a crooked line, their young faces showing fear and forced seriousness. Hitler, a shadow of the man he once was, moved slowly down the line. His left arm shook behind his back, a clear sign of his worsening Parkinson's disease. When he reached Alfred, he paused, maybe looking surprised for a moment at how small the boy was. Propaganda photos show the Führer pinching the boy's cheek, a move meant to look fatherly and kind. It was a planned move to make a dictator seem more human and to inspire a nation to believe in young heroes. Witnesses remembered him saying the usual empty promises of winning that no longer meant anything. The Iron Cross ribbon fell off twice before it stayed pinned to Alfred's borrowed coat. Alfred, a child in this strange scene, saluted, stepped back, and tried to stand still as cameras flashed, capturing the moment for propaganda. The whole scary ceremony took only 8 minutes. Then, just as quickly, the boys were taken downstairs, not to rest, but for cocoa and more group photos, another show for the cameras. After that, military police, without feeling, put them on trucks. They were not going home to safety, but east, straight to more fighting, to the front lines of a war that was already lost. The film, however, with the hard truth removed, was shown for weeks in German cinemas. It was a strong but false message that even children were willing to die for the failing country. It was a perfect example of trickery, a scary case of how desperate governments use children. After his short time as a propaganda star, Alfred was thrown into a much harder reality than any film could show. His quiet village, Goldenau, had been taken by Soviet tanks the day after his award ceremony. He would not learn for years that his father had been found dead 3 months after the war ended, shot in the neck. At the time, Alfred was given a helmet that was too big and slid over his eyes. He was handed 5 grenades and a scary order to defend a suburb of Freudenthal. The fighting was non-stop, with heavy cannon fire that tore the trenches apart. Friends, boys just like him, disappeared in the chaos of the war. It was there, in the fighting at Freudenthal, that Alfred was badly hurt. A shot to his lung spun him around and knocked him into an unsafe cellar. He lay there for 3 painful days, breathing in air that tasted like dust and blood. Amazingly, an officer found him and gave him a very important piece of advice that saved his life. The officer swapped Alfred's Iron Cross ribbon for a regular scarf. Then he whispered, "Throw the rest away if you want to see peace." It was an order to get rid of the signs of a lost war, to become unseen, to survive. Hours later, the German soldiers, with Alfred among them, were captured. The Iron Cross medal was still in his pocket. Following the officer's advice, Alfred threw it down a well, along with his Hitler Youth armband. But he kept the coat that was too big, not for pride, but for a simple need. The nights were cold, and he needed its little warmth. Interrogators, made tough by war, at first didn't believe his age. How could a child be fighting on the front line? Only when a doctor checked him and found his baby teeth did they start to believe his story. Even then, called a fascist mascot, a symbol of the government's evil, he was marched with older prisoners to a bleak prison camp. His brief moment as a hero was gone, replaced by the hard truth of what happens after a war, a truth that would shape the next part of his young life. The prison camp was a harsh and cruel place. It used to be for political prisoners, but now it was overflowing with surrendered Germans of all kinds, all gathered up in a wave of revenge. The conditions were terrible. Food came only once a day, thin beet soup and a small piece of bread that Alfred said tasted like clay. Sickness was a widespread killer, claiming lives even faster than the cold. Alfred, still small and with a lung wound that wasn't healed, was given the very hard work of carrying timber. This hard work was tough on his already weak body. By the first spring, he weighed only 38 kilos, and you could sadly see his ribs. It's a scary image of a child who was just skin and bone, a clear sign of the human cost of war. But children have an amazing strength and a special ability to get used to things. Alfred learned enough of the local language to joke with his guards, a small human connection in a place that made you feel less than human. He traded his work for cigarettes, which he then used as something valuable to trade for other things. He scratched calendars on the walls, marking the days, a quiet sign of his hope to be freed. When the Red Cross finally visited the camp in 1947, a sign of hope in a dark time, Alfred was told he might go home. But home, he soon found out, was gone. His land, Silesia, was now part of Poland. His village, Goldenau, was wiped off the maps as if it never existed. His family was listed as missing, a word that carried deep, painful uncertainty. The authorities, faced with a child whose home and family were gone, labeled him a stateless person. This meant even his release was not real freedom. With no place to go, he had to sign papers agreeing to work on a farm for 2 seasons. This basically continued his time as a prisoner, just in a different way. He was 15 years old, having spent his important childhood years not in school, but in a brutal prison camp, a clear sign of the long-lasting effects of war. In 1949, after years of forced work and having no home, Alfred, now 17, started a journey to a future he wasn't sure about. He hitchhiked to Bavaria, in the American part of Germany, with just a suitcase and an item with deep meaning, a second-hand Iron Cross. He had bought it for 2 cigarettes from a drunk Soviet clerk, a strange trade that says a lot about the weird time after the war. He couldn't really explain why he wanted it, only that having the symbol, a piece of his past, felt safer than forgetting it. It was a real connection to the past that had made him who he was. The refugee camps were full of people who were forced from their homes, all looking for a new start. Alfred waited in line for water, fought for a small place to sleep, and at night, listen to men plan useless plans for revenge they would never carry out. These were broken men from a broken country, and Alfred, still a boy, was one of them. His luck changed when a charity group placed him with a baker. The baker needed someone with strong lungs for the hot ovens. It was hard work, and his old war injury soon caused problems. Alfred's hurt lung collapsed twice, each time a scary reminder of his past. Yet, in these weak moments, he found kindness he didn't expect. The baker's wife fed him soup, caring for him and helping him get better as if he were her own son. During these times of rest, he had deep realizations. He thought that maybe just surviving was a victory itself. Maybe living and rebuilding was the real win. He started to save coins, a sign of his new hope. He went to evening classes to get back the education war took from him. In 1953, he passed his baker's exam, becoming a skilled craftsman. That same year, in a quiet act that showed he still had hope, he mailed a postcard to the Red Cross. "I am alive. If any Czech finds my parents, please write." He never got a reply, a sad silence that showed the permanent losses of war. But Alfred, the little captain, was now Alfred, the baker, making a new life for himself, one step at a time. In the late 50s, Alfred Czech settled into a life of quiet, hard work. He became a success as a baker, first owning half a bakery, then buying the whole shop through very hard work. His customers knew him as the quiet man who shaped bread with great care. They knew him for the nice smell of fresh bread that was always coming from his shop, but they knew nothing of his terrible past. He never talked about the war, a silence that came from a deep, personal pain. Inside, however, the nightmares came back again and again. The cellar, the taste of dust and blood, the screams of the hurt. These memories haunted his sleep. Yet, life often brings surprises. A lucky meeting changed the path of the quiet life he had built. Anna, a teacher, noticed the scars on the baker's hands. She asked him about them, and he answered honestly, "Grenade splinters." And Anna didn't pull away. She saw the man, not the scars. They married in 1962, a marriage built on understanding and quiet strength. Their honeymoon was in Italy, where the warm sun must have felt very strange, so different from the grey, war-damaged places of his childhood. They returned to their town and raised 3 daughters. Alfred, the man who had once met the Führer, now closed his shop at 6 every evening, walked home and read bedtime stories to his daughters in a voice that children trusted right away. Only once, in a rare moment when he spoke freely, did he mention the medal. His middle daughter, in the simple way children understand adult life, thought he had met Hitler like a scary Santa Claus. This became a family joke, a funny way to push away the sadness. "Don't pull Papa's cheek, he might salute." Gentle and healing laughter helped connect his past and their present. Years went by. Germany rebuilt itself. Europe created new connections. History books grew, telling the big stories of the war, while Alfred's own painful memories faded over time. For decades, Alfred Czech lived a quiet, private life. The boy from the old film was like a character from a legend, but the past often finds a way to return. In 1985, a German film crew, in an endless search for forgotten stories, found the boy from the newsreel. They found him not as a hero, but as a grandfather, with flour on his eyebrows, still making bread. The cameras were pushy and wouldn't stop, coming into the piece of his bakery. They pushed microphones at him, wanting a dramatic story. Alfred, however, agreed to talk only if they also interviewed former Soviet child soldiers. He wanted the story to be fair, not to make him look good, but to show the sadness of all children in war. The film was shown, and letters started to come, a flood of opinions and judgments. Some called him a victim, a child used by a terrible government. Others called him a criminal. The pressure of public attention after so many years of silence must have been huge. Then, one day, an envelope came with just a photo. It was a picture of his parents' names on a memorial stone in modern-day Poland, proof of what finally happened to them. The next winter, Alfred traveled there, to the land that was once his home. He touched the cold stone, a real connection to the family he lost, and for the first time, he cried. It was a moment of deep sadness and acceptance. When Germany reunited in 1990, more people became interested in his story. New films were made, museums wanted his things, and schools asked him to speak. Alfred, now a wise man, accepted. He understood the important job he had. As he often told students, "Remembering is the price I pay for being alive." It was his duty to share his story to make sure the lessons of his past are not forgotten. The second-hand Iron Cross, the one he bought for 2 cigarettes, now sits as a silent witness in the German Historical Museum. He gave it to them in 2005, a final act to put the past behind him, joking that they could have it for free this time. It was no longer his personal item, but a piece of history, a warning for people in the future. Old age brought its own problems for Alfred Czech. The lung wound he got in the war, the one that tasted like dust and blood, never fully healed and continued to bother him with breathing problems. Still, he stayed very active, taking care of his garden, playing his harmonica, and following football scores, finding small joys in daily life. Journalists still called him whenever color film of that scary ceremony in the garden showed up online. He answered them with patience. No, he did not feel like a hero. No, he did not want pity. Yes, he said, 12-year-olds should be in school, not in trenches. When asked if he hated anyone, his answer was simple but deep, from a lifetime of experience. I hate that children are used like money for politics. That idea seems to last longer than any war. It was a strong statement against it, a truth for everyone that came from his own sad story. In 2011, when a short book about his life was published, Alfred went back to a museum in a Berlin bunker, a place that held a scary echo of his past. He stood before a large picture of his own young face, stuck in that propaganda moment, and whispered, "We were the last coins thrown into a slot machine that was already broken." People nearby heard his deep and sad comment for a lost generation, but no one spoke. His words felt very heavy and important. Alfred Czech died peacefully in 2012 at the age of 79. He left behind his daughters, his grandchildren, and the lasting memory of a bakery that, even now, still opens its doors every morning, a sign of strength, hard work, and the quiet victory of a life that was lived. Alfred Czech's story is not a story of glory in the usual way. It is instead a clear and lasting bill for his innocence, paid to the endless needs of propaganda. The Iron Cross, pinned to his chest by the shaking hand of a dictator, did not protect him. It could not save him from bullets, the hardness of prison, or the years of silence he had to keep. Instead, that medal became a mirror that showed many uncomfortable truths. It showed a government so desperate and without any sense of right and wrong that it risked the lives of children, sending them to a war that was already lost. It showed a war that, in its endless cruelty, destroyed its own future. And most of all, it showed the amazing journey of a man who spent his life quietly proving that he was much more than a picture, more than a symbol. He was a survivor, a witness, and a sign of people's ability to survive and rebuild. Remembering Alfred Czech reminds us that the most dangerous time in history is not when the bad guys are easy to see. The truly dangerous moment is when regular people, because they don't care or are afraid, let leaders risk the lives of children and use innocence for their own gain. If this video answers one question, let it be this. Medals get old, countries fall, and ideas change, but the basic human ability to rebuild, find peace, and warn the future is always there. If you learned something new today, please think about subscribing and sharing this story. After all, history only stays alive when we keep telling its stories, learning from them, and making sure such sacrifices are never forgotten.